Hello and welcome back to Sweet Sycamore Devotions. I'm Nicole, and today we are digging into the lives of James and John. Last month we spoke about Simon Peter and Andrew, and I'm going to reference them a little today. But as always, if you know somebody that needs to hear this message, you can share through YouTube or through podcast platforms. Also, I'm going to really start to try and be better at posting on Instagram. This is my personal accountability, sharing it with you. And so if that is your jam and you love Instagram, I'm thinking about going to the Psalms, you can go over and follow it at Sweet Sycamore Devos, or I cross post my own personal Instagram is in Dicky. But today we are only talking about James and John in this two-part series this month. Now, James and John were considered part of the inner circle with Jesus. These two brothers are mentioned alongside Jesus several times in the Gospels when Jesus is here on earth. And so we're going to pick up in the scriptures right where they are mentioned first, which is right after Simon Peter and Andrew are called and invited to be followers of Jesus. And they left their nets and they follow Jesus. And we pick up in Mark 1, where it says, a little further up the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. Now, in contrast to Andrew and Simon Peter, we actually see that this must be a bigger boat, because we not only see James and John and their father Zebedee, but we see hired men. This lets us know that this was a family business and a successful one at that, because they have hired men. So what would make James and John leave a successful family business? James and John may have known some things about Jesus, but at this point, Jesus does not have a following like he will have later on in his ministry. The scriptures also tell us that Jesus was very ordinary looking. There wasn't something about his presence that drew people to him. So what made them literally drop their nets and go follow Jesus? It seems a little random, but we also know that Peter and Andrew had an unforgettable day with Jesus, where Peter gets a new name, Andrew spends quality time, and that perhaps James and John, being in this close proximity and also being in the same industry, heard about Andrew and Simon Peter's day with Jesus. We could also assume that perhaps they knew of Jesus from other people, or maybe just through the grapevine. But we also see that Peter and Andrew have been previously called by Jesus, because it says a little further up the shore. So Jesus has called them to be followers. And maybe James and John see Peter and Andrew following after this man and just assume that must be who they've been talking about, and they leave their work too and follow behind Peter and Andrew. Let me provide you another thought too. Some scholars actually believe that James and John were first cousins to Jesus, based on their mother being Salome, Mary's sister. Here's where they get this. See, Salome is mentioned in the book of Matthew at being at the cross with John and Mary, Jesus' mother. But then we have the book of John, where it mentions Mary being at the cross with Mary's sister in lieu of saying Salome. So if we overlay the Gospels, that's where they believe that Salome is Mary's sister. The book of John, who wrote that, would have known, because that was Salome's son, John. Now, honestly, it makes a little more sense for Jesus at the cross when he's dying and he looks at John and he says, take care of my mother, and he provides care for his mother through John, a first cousin. Well, that makes a little more sense too. It also would make sense being that we have this wedding where the first miracle happens and we see a lot of the disciples are present at this wedding. Well, why would they be invited? Perhaps because they were family and this was a family wedding. All of that to say, there is a possibility that John and James were first cousins to Jesus. If this is true, then they would have grown up with Jesus, which actually builds the credibility that Jesus is Christ. Why? Because if they saw him being a stinker as a child, they would have thought twice about following him as their rabbi. But I also like to stick up to what I do know, and we don't know all of that for sure. But what we do know is they truly left everything in that moment to go and follow Jesus, and that this was not a light decision for James and John. Now, just an interesting fact, Andrew and Simon Peter were casting nets when they were called, which their ministry was focused on evangelism, basically telling people about Jesus and bringing them in. But James and John were mending nets when Jesus called them to be his followers, which is interesting too, because they spent their ministry really mending people's relationships with God through love and through training others up. I just think it's so cool the way the scriptures kind of give us some insight into what is to come. We don't even know it, and we can read between the lines. But James and John did not start as great menders of nets. In fact, if we start in Mark 3, we actually see this. If we pick up in verse 13, this is what it says about James and John. Afterward, Jesus went up to the mountain and called out the ones he wanted to go with him. And they came to him. And he appointed 12 of them and called them his apostles. They were to accompany him, and he would send them out to preach, giving them authority to cast out demons. These are the 12 he chose: Simon, who he named Peter, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, but Jesus nicknamed them the sons of thunder. I absolutely love this last line where we get one of those rare moments into this fun view, this intimate nature of Jesus himself. Many of us think, Jesus, he's so serious. He's so matter of fact. There's no laughing matter with him. But this really gives us a glimpse into Jesus having a little bit of fun with James and John, giving them the nickname, the sons of thunder. The original meaning of this word is boanerges, which means rage. He is calling them the sons of rage. This is totally different than Simon Peter getting a new identity in Christ. No, this is a nickname. It's intended to foster personal connection. It's intimacy. It's belonging. It's an endearment. I was always Nikki my whole life until I married John Dickey 15 years ago. And thankfully, my mother gave me a formal name in Nicole, although I still giggle at God making me Nikki Dickey. I also know that sometimes I need to be known as Nicole when I'm trying to put that best foot forward professional kind of feel. But those who know me, they call me Nikki. And those who know me even better than that, the intimacy of my family, they call me Nikki Cole. See, what Jesus is doing here is he is giving James and John this intimate, I really know you kind of moment. But how could Jesus know them? Like, he just met them. See, John, the son of thunder himself, he actually talks about this in John 2, verses 24. Listen to what John says. He says, but Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. See, basically, John is saying, yeah, he knew me before I even knew myself. He knew all about me. Did you know this? That Jesus knew all about the disciples before he chose the disciples. Did you know that this is still true? Jesus knows what's in your heart. He knows where you will come up lacking. But he doesn't shame them. He doesn't cast blame. He's actually having a little bit of fun. Healthy families can laugh about others' weaknesses because they know it comes out of a place of love. And this is actually showing us this family unit of Jesus and the disciples where nothing is off the table and they just are having a little bit of fun. If Jesus were to give you a nickname, what would it be? I think mine would be Nikki the Frugal. Like, I love a good deal. My husband says if he can't find me, he's going to go look for clearance. Although I think it would be Nikki the Frugal, but in bulk, because when I find a deal, I snatch everything up I can. See, there's nothing that is held back from God. Nothing. Let's see how well he actually knew James and John, the sons of thunder. If we pick up in Luke 9, starting in verse 52, it says, he sent messengers ahead to a Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. But the people of the village did not welcome Jesus because he was on his way to Jerusalem. When James and John saw this, they said to Jesus, Lord, should we call down fire from heaven to burn them up? But Jesus turned and rebuked them. So they went on to another village. You guys, they wanted these people dead. They are volunteered to pray down fire from heaven for mass murder. And before you say, never would I ever, I know that there's a lot of you that wouldn't pray your enemies alive, right? I have literally been asked the question, is it wrong to pray people dead? Yes, absolutely yes. Don't do it. It's not what we should do. The scriptures tell us that we should pray for our enemies but not pray them dead, okay? It's a turn the other cheek. It's an act in love. It's a forgive 70 times 70, which is like infinite, right? Jesus knew these two well because they lived up to this. Honestly, these sons of thunder wanted to take out an entire village. But the next story we're going to see, they actually want to take out the leadership of Jesus' ministry. Here's a tidbit I want to leave with you today as we wrap up. James and John were thunderous. They showed signs of rage. But we don't know them as that within Jesus' ministry and within the early church. Why? Because Jesus may have had a little fun in their weaknesses, but he didn't leave them there. We all have weaknesses. They don't surprise him. He may even get a little snicker out of what continually trips you and I up. But if we allow him to come into that part of our life, he will not leave us there. Here's some questions I want you to ponder as we close today. And the first one is this: if Jesus could give you a nickname, what would it be? I already mentioned mine, Nikki the Frugal, but in bulk. The second, what is tripping you up within that you can surrender back to God? Just to be personal with you, Nikki the Frugal can sometimes struggle with giving extra upon extra to God, because I want there to be a sale attached to it, or a deal, or a clearance, even in my giving. And God has been leading me to a place where I can give without knowing that it's going to wherever it needs to go, that I can actually trust him in my giving. He knows me. He knows what trips me up, and still he chooses me. God knows you. He knows what trips you up, and still he chooses you too. He won't leave you in the same place he finds you. We're going to continually dig into James and John in our next devotion. I hope you continue to join me on the second and fourth Tuesdays as we dig into the disciples in our Among the 12 series. Until next time.